I think the best way to answer your question is to understand the history of the Johnson Amendment. First of all, it was passed in 1954 by then Senator Lyndon Johnson. What's interesting about the Johnson Amendment is that at the time it was passed, there was no debate on the Senate floor. No one considered it to be controversial. Basically, what it said was that religious institutions that are nonprofit and therefore not taxed cannot endorse or oppose political candidates. That was the Johnson Amendment. And it was construed over the years to mean that a pastor could not even stand up in front of his congregation and tell them who they could endorse or who they should vote for. This recent IRS filing has basically narrowed the interpretation of the Johnson Amendment to say that clergy, the pastor, can communicate with his congregation any way he wants to and tell them who to vote for. He just can't take the church out in public and the church take a position as to who they're going to support or not support. That's the change brought about by this new narrowing interpretation by the IRS.
Now, if my understanding is correct, the two churches who were plaintiffs in this case, both of them from East Texas, argued that this amendment was a violation of the First Amendment. Would you say that there was any First Amendment concerns? Was this something you thought was unconstitutional?
Well, it's clearly a restriction on the church's freedom of speech. And the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech to everyone in every organization. So from that standpoint, it was an unconstitutional restriction on the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression that we're all allowed.
So what could we see as a result of this filing? In terms of the consequences of this filing by the IRS, there are two different viewpoints. The first viewpoint is that it gives freedom of expression, the constitutional right of freedom of speech, to religious organizations, and that's a good thing. From the other perspective, there are a lot of people seeing this as a major change in campaign finance. This is the big change in campaign finance. Political contributions are typically not tax deductible. Contributions, however, to a religious organization or to any nonprofit are tax deductible. So, for example, if someone gives $1 million to a political candidate, they can't write that off. And the fact that they gave the money to the candidate is public information. If someone gives $1 million to a nonprofit or a church with the intent that that money be donated to the candidate, first of all, it's deductible by the person making the contribution, which is a major financial consequence. And secondly, churches are immune or not required to disclose who they got their money from. So under this IRS interpretation, people can give large amounts of money to religious institutions for the purpose of contributing to a campaign. They can write it off on their taxes, and the fact that they gave the money is not disclosed. This change could make religious institutions major financial players in political campaigns.